That was a great intro, pretty much more succinct than what I'm going to tell you here. But yeah, I started out in secure software systems design myself at places like Raytheon and Cypress Electronics and Khaki, doing crypto boxes for 3-letter acronym agencies and things of that sort. And then got into audit of computer systems, both on the blue teaming side, which is kind of collaborative with IT, you know, looking for missing patches and misconfigurations and that kind of stuff. And on the red teaming side, which is coming in stealthy, unannounced, as an attacker might, you know, looking to red team and, you know, get into a system through any means necessary. And ended up joining forces with Abacode about 5 years ago. We are we're about a 6.5-year-old company that does cybersecurity and compliance consulting. We do outsource programs for people. So we know it's very hard to find cybersecurity people. They don't grow on trees. There's like a 4 million person worldwide shortage of talent in cybersecurity. And so for a company to try to build its own program from scratch, or, you know, do it the right way, let's be honest, is hard to, you know, find the people, you know, hire full-time resources and all that. So our value proposition is we'll run an entire managed program for you. You know, everything from A to Z. We'll come in and do an assessment, see where you stand on everything, and then put it on, you know, we don't just hand you a report and walk away. We actually will help you fix everything that we find, you know, gaps in your operations. So that's us. My teaching at USF is kind of my fun side job I've been doing for 20 years, help them develop their curriculum around ethical hacking, mobile and wireless security, cryptography, forensics, and so forth. And as you mentioned, we started this student organization about 15, 16 years ago, and we're still getting, you know, really good turnout, 30 or 40 students a week to meetings, and our membership's still pretty good. I know COVID, you know, kind of impacted meeting together just like it has with this group, but you know, we're going to get it all back together there. And they participate in organized ethical hacking competitions. So there's a little Easter egg there on the bottom of the screen. That is a YouTube link to actually time when I talked about playing in the Defcon Capture the Flag Championship in Las Vegas, which is kind of the world championship of hacking. All right, so what are we going to talk about tonight? These are some topics that Evan and I kind of came up with, where we were saying, let's look at how cybersecurity is changing, especially around COVID, and what are some of the other emerging trends that we've been seeing. So I'm going to kind of overview the post-COVID world and you know, the whole, what is work from home kind of doing to the whole landscape, threatscape. This idea of what we used to think of as trusted software, not so much anymore. And this, you know, this should be of special interest to, you know, geographic solutions people, because you're developing software, right? You're doing DevOps, you're doing DevSecOps, I'm assuming. And so how do you make sure that things don't get into your supply chain? We're going to look at ransomware. So this has been very much in the news lately with the Colonial Pipeline hack. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit. You know, you might be surprised the way it actually launches is not rocket surgery or whatever, you know, it's something fairly predictable that we can actually look for. There's another emerging trend that we've been seeing with these SSL VPNs. Vulnerabilities have been coming out fast and furious on this, so I'm going to touch on that. And then the application of artificial intelligence, machine learning in cybersecurity. And then finally, we'll, you know, kind of wrap it up with what are we doing about all this? You know, how can we address it? At the end, as time permits, I'll do a little Ask Me Anything. So there you go. Getting right into it. This notion of the world up there in the upper left-hand corner as being this, you know, protected perimeter and everything's behind a firewall, that was a little pie in the sky, right? I mean, that really hasn't existed for the last few years, but even more so since COVID. You know, we used to think that we had, you know, your intranet and everything had to traverse through the firewall. But, you know, with cloud computing, mobile computing, wireless computing, you know, software as a service and all that stuff, you know, we've been kind of out of that world already anyway. So defining the perimeter has gotten very fuzzy over the last few years. Take it a step further over the last year with collaboration tools just like this, you know, GoToMeeting, you know, Zoom, teams and all that stuff, and you're just compounding it that much more. Plus, I bet companies never stop to think like how much of their business is run on, say, social media, right? You know, you can use LinkedIn for HR and hiring. You can use Twitter and Facebook for like public relations and, you know, help desk support and stuff like that. And you have to ask yourself the question, is all that under IT visibility and control? And the answer is probably no. Most organizations we come into, the first thing we want to do is take stock of where the data actually resides, right? And we find out that HR has its own system in the cloud. Payroll has its own, you know, outsourced third-party SaaS solution. You know, public relations has everybody has their own system. And it's probably all run by what I would call security amateurs, right? People that don't know about multi-factor authentication, they don't know about monitoring, audit log review, or anything like that. And so it's probably at risk. And so you have to get your arms around that whole new environment. And we come into this whole idea of zero trust. That's not just a industry buzz phrase anymore. Zero trust is a real thing, where we admit that it's very, very hard to protect the environment. And we assume a bad guy is probably already in the environment. That's very true. I mean, when we get called in to do forensics and incident response, we'll find out that on average, the attacker's already been in the environment undetected for 180 days on average, right? So, because they didn't know what they didn't know. So zero trust to me, and it means different things to different people, but to me, it means assume somebody's already in your environment and you want to keep them from getting to anything important, right? Micro-segmentation, that means maybe they got a foothold here, but they can't pivot over here. They can't move laterally. They can't get from there to this, you know, company jewels being intellectual property, financial data, personally identifiable information, and other stuff that has, you know, value. I mean, R&D, right? I mean, so much easier to go steal R&D data than it is to do your own. You know, I've run R&D teams before. They cost money, and sometimes the ideas don't ever go anywhere. So you spend a lot of money and you got nothing to show for it. Wouldn't it be a lot easier just to go hire a hacker and have them break into somebody else's system and steal their intellectual property? Sure, yeah, that's what the Chinese do all the time, and, you know, the Russians, everybody else. Not to mention, you know, corporate espionage. So microsegmentation is, you know, keeping them from getting to stuff they're not supposed to get to. Coming back to this whole Colonial Pipeline ransomware, they went ahead and paid the ransomware, right? They paid the ransom, like $5 million, whatever it was, and they said, oh, because we didn't want to see it shut down anymore. It was hurting America. But let's dig deeper into, you know, why did they really pay that? Did they really have? I mean, because it was their IT and administrative network that was hit with the ransomware, but they must not have been able to say clearly that there was a delineation or an air gap between that network and their operational technology network, right? Their pipeline, because that's why they shut down the whole thing. Contrast this with what happened, 2012, I think it was. Saudi Aramco got attacked. They had something like 35,000 computers that were destroyed, wiped, but they never ceased oil production operations, right? They used backup. They used, you know, paper and pencil backups to fulfill orders. So the fact that we brought this whole thing to a screeching halt on the pipeline tells me they didn't have good segmentation in place. They weren't confident of the segmentation in between their IT and their OT, right? The other thing you want to do is add, you know, single sign-on, multi-factor authentication everywhere. Don't just have it be based on passwords that are easily stolen and cracked and, you know, replayed. Multi-factor authentication means you have something on your phone, you know, some authenticator app or some other way, not only of what you know, but of what you have, and maybe even of what you are, right? Biometrics, thumbprint, iris print, facial recognition, stuff like that. You want to have endpoint detection and managed detection response capability everywhere. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. A whole technology called SIEM, Security Information Event Management, that's going to help us see the big picture. I know I'm talking fast and I want to crank through a lot of this, but if you ever have any questions as we go along, I have the chat open right now, and you can ask those as we go along, and I'll be happy to stop and answer questions, or we could just save them up to the end, whichever you like. All right, so talking about this whole idea of trusted or untrusted software, SolarWinds started with something called Sunspot. And so what Sunspot was, it was discovered by a group called FireEye Mandiant. They're a cybersecurity company, and they have an intrusion detection solution, and they also do a lot of incident response work. So they have a really good deep team, and they discovered that they themselves had been breached through the SolarWinds Orion software, and the attackers were coming in trying to steal the red teaming tools and other stuff. That's when they kind of blew the lid off the whole thing and started looking into it and realized it was, the initial vector of attack into FireEye was through a Trojanized version of SolarWinds Orion software. So something like they have SolarWinds, if you're not familiar, is network health and status reporting software. It's very powerful. It's good software typically when it's not Trojanized. And something like 30,000 clients use this. There are 30,000 customers around the world. About 18,000 of them had downloaded this Trojanized build. And the Trojanized build, I'll tell you about in a minute, but the initial vector of inserting this Trojanized build was something FireEye had dubbed Sunspot, which was an attack on the DevOps process of SolarWinds. They were actually able to put some command and control capability into the DevOps environment, so that whenever they launched like Visual Studio, it would be notified of the process running, and it would insert this backdoor code into the build, and it would suppress any debug messages from getting to the DevOps people. Very, very diabolical and clever the way they did it. But that went on unnoticed for something like 6 months. The purpose of Sunspot was to drop in these droppers, what we call Sunburst, Teardrop, Raindrop. Sunburst was a command and control, what they call remote access control Trojan, and then Teardrop and Raindrop would drop in something called an exploit framework. In this case, Cobalt Strike. So Cobalt Strike is a well-known. I don't know if anybody here has ever played with Metasploit or Cobalt Strike, but they're red teaming tools. They can be used for ethical purposes, right? I mean, we use them when we're doing red teaming to go test the security of somebody's environment, and it allows me to try to probe for known vulnerabilities, see if I can exploit them, and then once exploited, land a shell, which gives me remote access into the system, and then I can run various commands. Well, Cobalt Strike is a advanced version of a shell, an exploit framework for post exploitation. And you might be like, well, why don't I just block that from running, or why don't I just scan for the signature of that binary and block it? Well, because it's probably they probably have changed it a little bit, so it's hard to detect every time it runs. But it's good. It's a good point. I mean, a lot of this stuff we should be blocking based on bad behavior that it's doing, rather than on a strict binary signature of the running application. But my question is, how did that thing get in there in the first place, right? How did they get into the DevOps environment? And I have not read a good explanation of this yet, but I'm guessing that they just didn't have a good security information event management solution, and they didn't have anybody really watching their environment to see, to look for these types of activities. In your own environment, you can't trust on a point solution to provide security. If you're depending on antivirus, let's just say, or what they call, endpoint protection, even, advanced endpoint protection, the first thing an attacker might try to do is turn that off. So if you're depending on that to be reporting issues, and the attacker has figured out a way to disable it, well, then you're not going to get any feedback or information from your antivirus. So you kind of need a layer above that. You need a global view of security. All right, so I got a question for you. When it comes to Maze ransomware, or most any types of ransomware, here's a little quick poll for the environment here for our classroom tonight. What do you think is the most often used vector of attack for dropping ransomware? Is that a misconfigured service? So let's just say something like a missing patch on a public-facing, internet-facing service, or maybe a deprecated operating system. You know, they're still running Windows Server 2003, which is out of date? Or do you think it's, you know, attackers tricking users into clicking something or going to a fake site, you know, social engineering? Or do you think it's a remote desktop misconfiguration? Want to vote on in the chat real quick? Yeah, I would guess most people would guess that it is phishing and social engineering. But I have a perhaps surprising answer for you. It's actually remote desktop misconfiguration most often. And I learned this from, you know, there's a group that we work with called Coveware that does ransomware negotiations. And they ran some numbers last year of these things and found out it was about almost 2/3 remote desktop. And I don't just mean remote desktop protocol over port 3389 into Windows. I'm talking about any kind of remote software like Log Me In, Terminal Viewer, a Team Viewer, Terminal Service, Zoho, ConnectWise, Connect. All these different types of remote access services can be misconfigured to, you know, basically bypass your firewall and let anybody log in. And the way they do it is not extremely complex. It's brute force password guessing, right? I mean, that's been around forever. And it's also credential stuffing, which means they will find somebody's user ID and password from another breach, like say the Yahoo email breach or the LinkedIn breach or whatever, and they'll try it and they'll try it again. Oh, same user on this system, let me give it a shot. And sometimes they get lucky because people reuse their passwords. So let that be a lesson to you. Never reuse a password anywhere for that reason. And they don't have, you know, usually don't have multi-factor authentication set up correctly. So yeah, remote desktop is a big way into a system, and you need to lock that down and secure it. I would say don't allow logins from anywhere in the world, right? You know, if they're coming in from, now they're going to proxy them, so make it look like they're legit, but ultimately you can say, let's just lock that down to a whitelist of only known addresses that I trust, and let's push it all through a proxy, you know, Bastion host, an RDP server in the DMZ for my network, locked down with a, you know, virtual private network. You know, take all the steps to really lock that thing down and configure it correctly. Social engineering, phishing is the second most popular vector, and then service misconfigurations. All right. So why are these guys, the guys who did the pipeline hack are called DarkSide, and they already said they're going to go out of business. Like I guess stuff just got too hot for them after what happened. And in fact, there's all this political intrigue in Russia. You know, the Russian oligarchs kind of run everything over there. And if you ever do anything that brings too much undue attention, they're going to shut you down themselves, right? So some of the other interesting things is they don't allow you to launch ransomware on Russian companies or even, you know, former Soviet bloc companies. They will only let you, you know, go against greedy American and European companies. Anyways, they have like affiliate programs. They have a division of labor now where they will hire a red team to go find vulnerable systems, and they'll go, you know, attack them, own them, and then sell them to the ransomware teams, who will then give them some sort of commission to land, you know, to encrypt all the files, and then whatever ransom they get out of the thing, they'll pay them like say 30–40% of that, you know, for finding the system and exploiting it. So a lot of times it's very indiscriminate. They don't know who they're going after. Other times they do the research, like they'll go on, you know, Zoom Info and find out, oh, this company made $50 million last year. They evidently have money and they can pay, and they'll try to target that way. They have multiple extortion methods now, in that they not only will try to get you to pay the ransom for a decrypt key for your files, they're also, if you don't pay, they're going to embarrass you. They're going to put your files out there. They're going to dox you, put your private data, your customers' private data out there for everybody to see. In some cases, we've heard about them reporting companies to the Securities and Exchange Commission, you know, for they're outing you for not having cybersecurity due diligence in place and things like that. So they're very good business people, and you know, it's a crisis situation. It's a pandemic situation of ransomware out there right now. The good thing is we can kind of key on and target their stuff that they do the same way every time. And this is the same with the dark side ransomware that attacked the pipeline. This is the same with Maze ransomware that's gone after a lot of other high-profile businesses. But they run something akin to this every time. And so we can study their tools, techniques, and practices, or TTPs, through something called the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And if you're not familiar with that, it's a study of our adversaries' methods. And so they're always going to look first at your system, try to find some tools and scripts to exploit something to gain initial foothold or access. They're going to drop an executable in there for whatever they need to do, command and control, file encryption, collecting additional credentials, and so forth. For persistence, they always want to have a backdoor for later. A lot of times we'll actually see them fix the bug that they use to initially exploit or access a computer, because they don't want anybody else to come in and use the same bug to get in. Once they own you, you belong to them. But they will create like an account or some other kind of backdoor. They don't want to just be an unprivileged user. They want to have root or admin level privileges that's going to allow them to drop in a rootkit or whatever they want to do. So they're going to try to escalate privileges. They're going to try to turn off your antivirus, kill any tools that are used for evaluating or looking at logs or binary malware reversing. They're going to try to scrape passwords through tools like Mimikatz. They're going to try to discover any intellectual property or sensitive data, move laterally, collect stage data for exfiltration, send it all out, and then shut you down with encrypting all your files and charging you a Bitcoin ransom. Now that was a higher ransom yesterday than it was today, since I think Bitcoin lost like 40%, but it's still a hefty sum, let me tell you. Some of these people, I think the pipeline paid a 75 Bitcoin ransom. So if we look at the attack signatures based on these TTPs, for persistence, Maze will usually drop a startup vrun.batch file in your startup folder in Windows. If you're trying to use like IDA Pro or any kind of dynamic analysis tools, it will try to scan for those running processes and kill them. It uses something called Mimikatz to scrape passwords. If you're not familiar with that tool, super powerful. It actually looks at random access memory, running memory, and can find plain text passwords for anybody that's logged in recently to Windows. It moves laterally through use of PSExec and PowerShell. These are, sysadmin level tools that are used for remote execution over the network. They're great tools. I mean, everybody uses all the time for legit purposes, but in this case, they're being used for, spreading. For command and control, we see them connecting out to hard-coded IPs, but those change like every few minutes. As soon as they get on somebody's blacklist, then they'll change them to something new. To collect your data and exfiltrate it, we can always find vestiges of 7-zip and FTP program called WinSCP for moving data off the site. Then impact is the nasty stuff they do. They change, alter, delete, kill processes and all that stuff. So if you're not familiar with Windows shadow volumes, if you ever install like a program and then it causes, you reboot and it causes blue screen of death, then you have to go back into like Windows safe mode and try to revert back to an earlier known good version of Windows. That's the shadow volume service that's doing that. So they'll kill that service and then they'll delete your shadow volumes. So they're going to keep you from trying to revert back to any previous version of Windows. And then they stop your database service so they can encrypt your databases. I mean, this is all awful stuff that they do. But if I can see it early in the kill chain up here in the initial access and execution phase before anything gets too bad, I can contain it and eradicate them, fix the problem, and make sure they're kicked out. Now notice, I didn't say I could stop them from at all getting in. I'm going to try. I'm going to do everything I can to build up proactive defenses. But the bottom line is, I have to defend 1,000 ways into the castle, and the attacker only has to find one successful way in. So it's a losing game in that regard. So really what the majority of what you need is visibility and incident response. I know that sounds reactive instead of proactive, but that's the new normal. And that is according to our best practices frameworks. If you look at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they published something called the Cybersecurity Framework for Critical Infrastructure Protection. And probably 20% of there's about 155 controls that they recommend that any business have in place for cybersecurity. About 20-25% of those are preventative, things like encryption and locking down files and systems and stuff like that. But about 50 to 60% of it is detection and response, right? And then the last percentage is continuous improvement. So like having a feedback loop where you're maturing, you're always getting better at what you do. That's the new normal that we live in. And that a lot of it has to do with detection and response. Prevention is overrated and impossible. All right, so changing gears a little bit. This is probably new info for a lot of you if you haven't been keeping up on this stuff recently. But Juniper Pulse Secure VPN, and then before that, the FortiGate 40 OS Firewall SSL VPN, and then before that, Palo Alto and Cisco and some others. We've seen this over and over again. The same thing has happened where attackers have been able to exploit the web access or the SSL VPN that's given to you through your firewall to actually compromise the firewall, get passwords and stuff like that. Let me tell you how all that works. And everybody uses SSL VPN, right? It's super popular because it operates at layer 5, right? It doesn't operate down to layer 2. You don't need or layer 3. You don't need specific extra hardware. It's built into the firewall. All you need is a web browser to connect. You don't even need an agent or any kind of software installed to connect. So it's very, very popular. And it's, just the SSL VPN for FortiGate firewalls alone is on 500,000 servers around the internet. So there's a couple right there: Twitter, Marvel, Facebook, and others all use these. So these hackers, and they're ethical hackers, they responsibly disclose their vulnerabilities and everything through bug bounty programs. Orange Psi and Mechang are capture the flag players, just like I was mentioning. Defcon capture the flag. They came in second place last year, I think second or third the year before. This year they actually landed an Exchange 0-day in the Pwn to Own Championship. If you're not familiar with that, it's over at CanSec West in Vancouver every year, and they, Apple and Google and Microsoft and everybody gives out huge prizes for people that can drop a 0-day that they've never seen before. And so everybody holds on to their 0 days, and then they show up at this thing and they launch them and make huge bucks, right? So yeah, SSL VPNs are like a slot machine according to these guys. And so what do? They, whoops, sorry, went too fast here. They treat the firewall binary as just like this big blob. It's a giant binary blob with symbols stripped. So no fun, right? But think about it. If you have a disk, if you have like a Unix or Linux system and you can mount it and boot into single user mode, right, you're in. And it's not that simple. They actually had to do some additional work to figure out how to patch it in memory to help drop into a shell. But ultimately, they're able to get into a shell. And then they just go exploring around inside the Unix-like environment. So it has, they're going to beeline for /etc/password, right? They're going to go look for passwords immediately. They're going to go look for anything of note. What they found is most of these implementations of firewall SSL VPN would use native script language extensions, which is a big problem, because then you have type mismatches, you have format string errors and things like that, buffer overflow issues that they could exploit. they also found out that most of these were based off like a 20-year-old version of Apache code, right? Right? I mean, it's, they said it was older than their grandma, right? And it's been out there forever. And so you're probably not going to reinvent the wheel when you write your own SSL VPN. You're probably going to start with something that's already exists, or if you're going to use libraries, if you're going to actually point to libraries, you're going to have to keep that thing updated an awful lot, because libraries change all the time, and you could be using a deprecated form of library. Orange also found in his 2018 Black Hat Briefings talk, he talked about all these path normalization bugs that he found between a C++ front end web server and a RESTful API backend. And there's all the O days you see there that he got paid for, money for bug bounties. What each of those meant was he could do a directory traversal attack. He could, instead of going to a website and just, bringing up like an image or some file, he could use a bunch of backslashes and escape out of the folder that he was in into one that he wasn't supposed to get into, right? A directory traversal. So long and short, after much poking around, they found some ridiculous things in there. For example, user IDs and passwords of everybody who's ever logged into the VPN service, okay? And we actually saw this one. So the patch for that came out like over a year ago for the FortiGate 40 OS firewalls. And yet we got called in to do a forensic investigation at the end of last year for a company that had not patched. And we were sitting there doing the digital forensics and cleanup, and we kept seeing the attackers like get back into the system. We're like, how are they getting back in? And we finally figured out it was because their firewall was so far out of date. So a lot of times when people do their patching and they do their vulnerability management, they think about Windows, they think about desktop applications like Adobe and stuff like that, and they completely forget about infrastructure, firewall, firmware, printer, firmware, virtualization, right? And remote access software, remote server software. All this stuff escapes their notice, and that all has to be considered inside of a vulnerability management program. Long and short, I recommend actually not using SSL VPN unless you're going to lock it down very well in accordance with the NIST special publication 800-113 I gave you right there. All right. Quick drink here. I'm making this like a Defcon talk. I don't have like shots to do, but I do have a light beer to drink. All right. That's the difference. If you guys ever heard of Black Hat Briefings in Vegas, and then right after that is Defcon. So Black Hat Briefings is like about 10 to 15,000 people attend, mostly professionals. It's about $3,000. It's Mandalay Bay. And then right after that is Defcon, which is a hacker conference, probably 25,000 people, and it's about $300 to attend, right? So that's the big difference. The same speakers will give the talk at Black Hat and then give the exact same talk at Defcon, but the difference is they'll probably be doing shots during their Defcon talk, which is a little more fun. All right, so you guys know what AI is, trying to mimic the capabilities of the human mind to recognize objects, solve problems, do repeatable jobs, things that a human might do. So the question is, are we seeing this yet in terms of attacks? Are we seeing, is the new Threatscape include AI? I've heard this hype. We've got to have AI in place to be able to combat AI-based attacks. And theoretically, you could see that those could be coming, right? If ransomware gangs are making, let's just say, $50 billion a year, and they are running them kind of like businesses, if they turn back, say, 10% of their proceeds into R&D to get better at what they do, I could see them actually investing in some AI or machine learning type tools. However, I'll say up to this point, we haven't really seen any concrete evidence in the wild of these APT, advanced persistent threat groups, actually using those techniques. But I think it could be coming. Reason being, again, at Defcon a few years ago, we saw the Cyber Grand Challenge. This is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, the same group that invented the internet, put on a cyber grand challenge to see if automated systems could, attack and defend in a simulated threat environment, and they showed that they could. But even the winning team, which was Mayhem, the winning team in the Cyber Grand Challenge was then allowed to play in Capture the Flag versus 20 human teams, and Mayhem finished in last place, right? It's just not up there yet with the human teams. You still need kind of critical thinking, right brain thinking. Now, don't get me wrong, computers are very, very good at solving low-hanging fruit and stuff that requires a lot of data analytics, number crunching, and things like that. But they're just not quite up to the point where they can, outstrip a human yet at finding and solving cybersecurity issues. So some final thoughts on artificial intelligence. There's a book called Tribe of Hackers. You can download that for free. If you read that, I'd say about half the people in that book say about the same thing. Good security comes from good security folks, from people, right? Not from a shiny box that does stuff. So the way I see AI as being used in the future is as a force multiplier for us, right? A trained analyst can look at things and can actually help train data sets for an AI, right? Or they can say, if they have to look through a big blob of data, they can use AI rules and heuristics to correlate that data and bubble up outliers and things for bearing further investigation. So I do see it as a force multiplier, but I just don't see it as taking the place of humans as yet, right? You still need those folks to make sense of the alerts, respond to them, and that's just not something I want to leave up to a box to do. I especially don't want to leave it up to a box to automatically patch things or fix security issues on my network. Anybody a Silicon Valley fan? Did anybody watch that show? I don't want to give away a spoiler, but basically at the very end of the series, they decide not to deploy the Pied Piper network because the AI in the network has figured a way to optimize their compression algorithm so much that it bypasses encryption, it bypasses security, and they feel like that is just that's a negative thing they don't want to do, and they feel like it's stealing people's privacy, and they don't want to do that. So they decide not to launch their system. And so I don't know if we're going to get to that point or not, where we're going to have to make those ethical decisions. But for now, I think humans have a little bit of a leg up on computers when it comes to security analysis. All right, so what can we do about all this? I think I've kind of given you some insights already of some of the best practices that we want to have in place. Anybody that is trying to accomplish security needs to have a plan. They need to take stock of where they are right now, come up with a roadmap for addressing any gaps or issues. They definitely need to have continuous monitoring. If they don't have that, they don't have really any security. And then finally, I would say train people to be kind of the first line of defense. So what do I mean about having a plan? You have to have management buy-in for this, right? This can't be a grassroots effort of the IT department. It really has to start at the top, and it has to inculcate the entire environment, your entire enterprise, everybody, HR, payroll, operations, management, the maintenance, janitor team. Everybody has to be in on cybersecurity. It's got to apply to everybody, because otherwise you're leaving holes. And it also has to be a business first decision, right? You're doing this to accomplish the business function of the company. So I can't stand it when like vendors just come in and try to sell a product, and they're like, oh, this will solve your problem. No, probably won't. It'll probably create more problems. What you really need is somebody to take a holistic view of security and look at what's the business function we're trying to accomplish first, and then we'll come up with select the technologies and the methods for addressing all those things. So your roadmap should include regular vulnerability assessment, a regular method of incident response, business continuity, disaster recovery, and so forth. On a regular basis, you need to be checking the security of your system. So scanning, penetration testing, making sure you have compliance against a best practices framework. I listed one there, the CIS Top 20. So the Center for Internet Security just came out with their version 8 of their controls. That's a really good starting point for most any company. The other one I mentioned was the NIST Cybersecurity Framework for Critical Infrastructure Protection. That's also an industry standard. ISO 27001 is an international standard. So you just need to find one that applies to your industry. And these aren't things I'm making up. These are accepted best practices across the board. And those are things, a company has to realize it has to put those things in place to even be in business these days. If you're not doing those, I've seen some companies like, oh, I'll buy cyber breach insurance. Yeah, maybe, but the breach insurance application is going to say, do you have X, Y, and Z in place? And if you lie and you don't really have those things in place, when you get breached, they're not going to pay out on that claim, right? Or if you say you don't have those in place, guess what? Your premiums are going to be super high because you're going to be more a riskier claim. So you have to have those things in place to even be in business these days. This is the thing I've mentioned so much already, but it is, to me, the most important aspect. And I tell you that from doing probably 600 or 700 audits of government and commercial systems. The thing that was lacking 90, 95% of the time was visibility into what was going on. They didn't have eyes on glass, people watching, people able to see and respond in near real time. But that's what you need nowadays to be able to combat these attacks like, WannaCry, Petya, NotPetya, the ones I just told you about, these SSL VPN attacks, the ransomware attacks. You've got to have eyes on glass. Even the SolarWinds attack, right? We would have been able to spot that. There's indicators of compromise, for example, Cobalt Strike, exploit framework, establishing command and control. There's things we could have spotted, right? If we were watching for those things, even if we'd never seen, even if we didn't know what was causing it, right? We could at least spot the bad behavior and be able to block it or do something about it. So all these other things you need in a security framework are super important. Policies and procedures, assessments, firewalls, endpoint protection, user training. But none of those can tell you right now, today, if somebody's inside your network and what they're doing. That's why you need the monitoring. And then the final thing, of course, is cybersecurity awareness for employees. I don't know if you guys do training there, but on an annual basis, you should be, watching some videos, taking some quizzes, and then have people phishing you all the time, right? I hate it, of course. It keeps you on your toes, though, right? We're not trying to trick people with this stuff. We're trying to empower them to be kind of the first line of defense, because humans can subvert other security controls that we have in place, unfortunately. There's no such thing as a foolproof system. I've thought about this before. We would like to make such a thing, but as long as humans design and operate systems, there's going to be a possibility of exploit there, right? Because how do you keep somebody from, like, you could have, here's an example. You could have a data loss prevention system in place, which means you're figuring out where all your important data are, you're labeling it, tagging it, controlling it, and then keeping it from going out through the firewall, block it, before it goes anywhere. But how do you keep somebody from like picking up their phone and taking a screen, picture of the screen, right? You can't, right? There's always going to be some way to subvert those controls. So you have to keep people aware that they can, people are going to call them up and try to get information that way. People are going to try to trick them in emails through messages, SMS text messages, they call smishing. There's phishing, which is email spam, vishing, which is voice, and smishing, which is SMS text messages. You just got to be aware of these things. We found out that through training, through regular good managed training program, we can take a firm's susceptibility down from like 25 to 30% susceptibility initially to about 2 to 3%. Notice I didn't say eliminate, but what we're trying to do is lower risk, lower the attack canvas. All right, so we drank from the fire hose there. That was a lot of info, but I'll be happy to open up the floor to any questions right now if anybody has anything.
Hey everybody, I just wanted to open it up and say if you would like to submit a question, please go ahead and put it in the chat window, or I can unmute you if you would like. Well, I'll start off. Jeremy, I did have a question. With the Colonial Pipeline, is it possible that someone was in the system for longer than 90 days or shorter? Do you think that there's any information on that?
I haven't seen it yet, but I do know that the indicators of compromise for the ransomware being used by them is very similar to what we saw with the Maze ransomware. So yeah, they used Mimikatz to scrape passwords. They used Cobalt Strike, I believe, as an exploit framework for post exploitation. They established command and control. There's some of the typical things what they're using. I'll tell you what, we did a recent investigation for a local company here in Tampa. They're a manufacturing company, and they had unfortunately their backup system was a NAS, a network area storage, that was co-located with their primary system. So when the primary system got encrypted, so did the backup system, and they didn't have anything going like offsite or up into the cloud, right? So bad idea. But we found out the attackers, once inside the system, they deleted all of the event logs after they were done doing, all their dirty work. They were there for about 3 or 4 months, and then they deleted all the event logs. All you saw was one event log entry that said, the event log's been deleted. And then, since there was no backups before that, they didn't know what happened. Long and short, they couldn't ship product. They couldn't receive payments. They ended up having to pay the attacker something like $450,000 for decrypt key. We were able to decrypt all their files with difficulty. Think about this: you need an equivalent amount of decrypt space, processing and everything to do the decryption, right? So we had to actually put together a makeshift NAS, from some servers and some disks to be able to do the decrypt, which we finally were able to do. But anyways, yeah, so I don't know. I don't have the specific details about that pipeline attack, but from what I've been reading, it's very similar to the other ones we've seen. Nothing too out of the ordinary, other than the fact that it shut down critical infrastructure, spiked our gas prices, and caused everybody a lot of worry.
Thank you. Yeah, and I was going to say, Cameron, do you want to ask? Do you want me to unmute you and you can ask the question, or is chat fine?
Nope. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I think you're asking like Skynet, where we see the system getting gaining sentience and then killing us all. I don't know, shutting us out. I don't know. I do worry about that for sure. It's probably a little bit too far in the future for us to be worried about yet, but I would definitely think twice before giving over control of critical infrastructure systems solely to an artificial intelligence, if that makes sense, right? We saw that from the 1983 movie War Games, where they were going to hand over a nuclear launching to an AI. Not a good idea, right? So for obvious reasons, I think there's probably still things we want to have under control of humans, and multiple humans have to check off on things before they can happen.
Yeah, most definitely. That was not exactly the most serious of questions, but I was wondering about it since you brought up AI in this presentation. I do have another question if nobody else has one before. So regarding no trust, how safe of an alternative is two-factor authentication when you're using something like let's say Dropbox to hold important files? How safe should you feel if you're using two-factor to protect those files?
Right. So it's better than one factor, right? Multiple factors is better than one, right? So think about this. With one factor, all they have to do is trick you into providing your user ID and password through any means, and they've got you. But adding that multiple factor, now they have to have your phone as well, which they probably don't have. Having said that, it's not foolproof, because I can think of at least two ways you could bypass a two-factor authentication system. One is set up a proxy website that looks exactly like the original, like the real one. And then you enter your username and password into that one, and then they set up a secure connection with the real one, send your credentials to it, and then the real web server sends you a prompt for your second factor of authentication, which you do, and now the attacker is able to get into that system during some short window of opportunity. That doesn't let them get in at a later time, but it lets them get in that one time. Another possibility would be, let me think, another way to bypass multi-factor authentication. Oh, they could port out your phone, which I've heard about that happening too. So the way they do it is they go and trick somebody at the AT&T or T-Mobile store into changing the number, your SIM card to another phone number, okay? And then they port you out, and then now they have all your when you say, oh, I forgot my password, okay, we'll send you a link to your SMS, and then they can port out everything and change all your passwords there. That's also a dangerous attack. So like I said, it's not foolproof, but it does add another layer of security. So I think two-factor, you definitely want to set up every time on all your email, your social media, your banking accounts, and all that stuff, Dropbox. But it's just one thing. It's part of an overall framework of security. It shouldn't be the only thing you depend on.
Okay, thank you very much.
Absolutely. So this one is, do you think we'll see more incidents with critical infrastructure? Yeah, so if anybody's not familiar with that story, over Super Bowl weekend here in Oldsmar, somebody was looking at their computer and they saw the mouse starting, cursor starting to move, and somebody was in there, through TeamViewer and remote access to this computer, and they went in. Now, they might have thought it was just IT sysadmin person, right? They had an outsourced IT company that was doing work for them. But then when the cursor went over to the water supply controls and started changing the sodium hydroxide levels to like 100 times normal, well, then they, obviously that was nefarious, malicious. But you think about that. What if that person were like taking a break? What if they went to the bathroom, got a cup of coffee or whatever, they just weren't even paying attention and they didn't see that happen? That could have been super dangerous. So there's so many issues there, right? Like, first of all, why would you not have a gap between, a remote access system and something that controls the water supply, right? That's not a good, why would you not whitelist remote access to only known good IP addresses? Why would you allow, multiple login attempts? Because a lot of these, like I said, they're just password guessing. And sometimes they don't have it configured correctly, and it doesn't lock anybody out, and they can have as many tries as they like. So there's all those questions, but I think definitely that we saw it could have been a nation state probing. Okay, so here's about this Colonial Pipeline. This is kind of two camps of thought here. One is dark side said, oh, we're apolitical, we just go after greedy U.S. corporations, and we didn't know it was critical infrastructure. We were just trying to make a buck. Maybe, or it could have been APTs, nation state backed probing to disrupt, cause chaos, right? They're all about that, right? They're trying to do that in the elections. They're trying to do that through fake news, social media, and all that stuff. So I don't know. I don't know if it was, and like I said, probably not much happens in Russia without these oligarchs knowing about it. So I don't think they could have tried it. They couldn't have gone after this service without somebody knowing it, especially when they're getting like a $5 million ransom. Somebody's going to definitely be hip to that. You're going to have to pay. It's like the mafia, right? You're going to have to pay somebody protection, to keep that money if you're operating out of Russia. So I think that we're going to see a lot more incidents, honestly. And if you look at some of these, Foreign Affairs and some of these other journals, they're very much forecasting that on the horizon, that this is, we're going to see more and more of these, because if this really was an attack on U.S. infrastructure by the Russians, do you think we're not going to try anything in return? I guarantee you we will hack back, right? I mean, there's probably, some plan. There's stuff we probably don't ever hear about that happens all the time, but I think it's going to be, we hit you guys, we're going to hit back, and I think it's going to keep going. It's only the tip of the iceberg, unfortunately. Any other questions?
Well, if there aren't any more questions, I do have one or two more I just thought of during the presentation. Do you have any tips for setting up remote desktop to prevent attacks? I know you mentioned that that was a big where we're seeing a lot of attacks from. And also, are there any software that you recommend that are better than others?
Yeah. So let me kill this presentation here. All right. Yes, absolutely. I do have some tips for best practices for remote desktop, and rather than just try to remember them all from memory, I'm going to pull them up. So give me 1 second. All right. So obviously, at the firewall, you want to be careful about exposing RDP listening ports, 3389 to the public internet without locking this down. I propose having an RDP gateway in your DMZ that's locked down with VPN and multi-factor authentication. I would like you to set up long and strong passwords everywhere. So 24 characters or more. 24 characters, really? You say, yes, I do. Let me tell you, when we get hired to do a red team, and I come in and I'm able to set up something called Responder, which is we take advantage of 99% of all companies do not have SMB signing set up on their Windows network. So I'm able to put a kind of man-in-the-middle attack in there and grab password hashes. So whenever you're logging into a Windows resource, you're passing like a ticket or a hash. I can grab the hash. Sometimes I can even replay a hash and get into stuff. Sometimes it's a plain text password. In some older backwards compatible versions of Windows, you have that. And then other times I just take the hash and I try to crack it. So if it's a simple like 8-character password, I'm gonna get it, right? If it's a 24-character password, I'm not gonna get it, right? I'm never, not in 100 million years will I get that cracked, right? It's just not gonna happen. So I say long and strong passwords. Utilize some kind of multi-factor or single sign-on solution like a Duo or Okta or something like that. That's going to allow you to do MFA, role-based access control, provisioning, and so forth. Another issue I see is a lot of times there's too many admin accounts. We did a pen test on a insurance company, and I found like 163 domain admin accounts. There's no reason you should have that many, right? You should only have like 3 or 4 people that have that level of access. I mean, if it's a giant organization, then maybe you have different groups or whatever, and you might have some system level accounts to do, enterprise level application accounts, but you shouldn't have that many, right? And some of those people weren't even in the organization anymore, and some of them, we had a field day because there were so many to choose from. So limiting administrative access is a big issue. Vulnerability management, we already mentioned, keeping everything patched and locked down, having a program that regularly researches vulnerabilities, tests them, regression tests them, and installs the patches in a timely manner across the enterprise is super important, and especially for, like I said, shadow IT, firewalls, network infrastructure, virtualization, and other printers and stuff like that. That's stuff that you might forget. Microsoft has something called network level authentication also that I recommend using for enhancing remote desktop security by requiring you to be authenticated to a remote desktop session before the session gets created. So that can help prevent denial of service attacks that result from people just brute force password guessing, right? We already mentioned user awareness training so that people don't fall victim to the attacks, and then network segmentation, as we said, keeping, just because you access or able to get a foothold or exploit one part of the system doesn't allow you to get into other parts. So that's kind of my best practices there. I mean, I don't think TeamViewer is all that bad of a solution. I think it's, probably pretty solid if set up correctly, securely with long and strong passwords and with multi-factor authentication.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. We scheduled up until 7 p.m. So I think Cameron maybe just has one more comment or question. Maybe we can cover that, and then we can wrap it up.
Okay. Let's see. Got to get back into my chat window.
And I think Cameron's saying he has an idea for setting up remote desktop with whitelisting based on access location. Could you have everyone purposely proxy as if they are accessing from a predetermined location only known to employees?
If I'm thinking like an attacker, then all I have to do is figure out what that location is and then copy it, and then I can proxy through it as well, right? I mean, so maybe that's not going to work, but I see what you're saying. Again, it's just one of many things, right? Maybe you could also add in there MAC address whitelisting, right? By hardware ID. Think layers of security. This is just one thing, and it's not the only thing. But yeah, maybe I have to think about that one. I would say definitely consider geopolitical blacklisting, right? If you're not doing any business with North Korea or Nigeria, China, whatever, maybe just block them. Like you don't need anything. You don't need any connections coming in from there.
Thank you, Jeremy. I just wanted to go ahead and just thank you for taking the time to talk to the group tonight. My name is Evan. I'm the digital content coordinator. I'm on the marketing team here at Geographic Solutions. We do this meetup as a way to exchange knowledge in the local Tampa Bay tech scene, and we're also members of Tampa Bay Tech. But you can find us here, and you can find Jeremy at Abacode. So please go ahead and visit this link as well.
Totally my pleasure to be here and see everybody. I hope you got something useful out of it that you can apply to your life, and call again anytime.